We're taking Claudia to Rome for her wedding planning. We leave tomorrow morning. I stared at my phone, reading my mother's text message over and over, trying to make sense of the words. Tomorrow was March 15th, my 20th birthday. What about my birthday? I typed back, my hands shaking. The response came 5 minutes later. Claudia needs us right now. You understand. There's money in your account for dinner. Happy birthday, Annabelle. I sat on my bed in our family home in Denver, staring at that message until the screen went dark. 20 years old tomorrow, and my entire family was flying to Italy without me. Not for an emergency, not for something unavoidable, for wedding planning. For my sister Claudia, who at 27 had everything she could ever want and still demanded more. My name is Annabelle, and I have spent my entire life being invisible to my own family. Claudia was the golden child. She graduated from Stanford with honors, became a corporate attorney at one of Denver's top firms, and was now marrying Gregory, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels. She was beautiful, successful, and commanded attention simply by existing. My parents worshipped her. I was studying education at a state university because I wanted to be a teacher. My father once told me it was a waste of my potential. My mother just looked disappointed whenever I mentioned my major. I lived at home not because it was practical, but because Claudia had lived at home through college, so I should too. Never mind that Claudia had an entire wing of the house while I had a bedroom barely bigger than a closet. I woke up on my birthday to complete silence. The house was empty. They had left at dawn without waking me, without saying goodbye, without acknowledging that today might matter to me at all. I walked through the immaculate kitchen where my mother had cleaned before leaving, erasing any trace of their existence. No birthday cake, no balloons, no card, just cold granite countertops and the hollow echo of my own footsteps. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Victoria. Happy birthday. Coffee later? At least someone remembered. I spent the day going through the motions, classes, note-taking, pretending everything was fine. Victoria took me to dinner at a small Italian restaurant, which felt like a cruel joke since my family was currently dining in actual Italy. She meant well, and I appreciated her effort, but the weight in my chest would not lift. They'll come around eventually, Victoria said over pasta, her expression sympathetic. But she did not understand. Her family was warm and chaotic, 5 siblings constantly competing for attention in the best way. She could not comprehend what it meant to be perpetually overlooked by the people who were supposed to love you most. When I got home that night, I found another text from my mother. We extended the trip through the weekend. Claudia found the perfect venue. You should see it. Absolutely stunning. Not even an apology for missing my birthday. Just an update about Claudia's perfect life, delivered with all the emotion of a weather report. I lay in bed that night, wondering what I had done to deserve this distance. Had I been a difficult child? Too quiet? Not ambitious enough? I had spent 20 years trying to understand the formula that would make my parents look at me the way they looked at Claudia, but I was no closer to solving it. The wedding preparations consumed the next 3 months. Every dinner conversation revolved around Claudia. The venue, the flowers, the dress, the guest list, the menu. My mother quit her part-time job to focus entirely on planning. My father worked extra hours to pay for everything Claudia wanted, and I continued making myself smaller, quieter, less of a burden. You're invited, obviously, Claudia said one night at dinner, barely looking up from her phone. Thank you, I replied softly. We'll have you help with the setup, my mother added. You can make yourself useful. Not be in the wedding party, not share in the joy as a sister. Help with setup, like hired staff. The invitation arrived in April, thick cardstock with gold lettering. Mine came in the mail like everyone else's, not handed to me personally. At the bottom, in small print, it mentioned that seating assignments would be distributed at the venue. Something about that phrasing made my stomach turn, though I could not explain why. May brought escalating chaos. My mother became completely consumed with perfection. My father wrote check after check. And I studied for finals, attended classes, and felt increasingly like a ghost in my own home. The week before the wedding, my mother sat me down with a list of tasks. Arrive early to arrange place cards, organize the gift table, make myself useful without being conspicuous. "This is Claudia's day," she said firmly. "Everything needs to be perfect." I understood exactly what she meant. I understood where I stood. I understood that my 20th birthday would never be mentioned again. I understood that I was valued only for what I could do, not for who I was. The night before the wedding, I considered not attending. Who would even notice my absence? But obligation kept me tethered. Tomorrow would be Claudia's perfect day, and I would be exactly where I always was, invisible, useful only when needed, and utterly alone. The morning of June 12th arrived with flawless weather. I dressed carefully in a pale blue dress I had bought with Victoria, applied minimal makeup, and stared at my reflection. I looked tired, 20 years old and already exhausted by my own life. The botanical gardens sprawled across acres of perfectly maintained grounds. I arrived at 8, as instructed, finding the venue already humming with activity. Wedding planners shouted orders. Florists wove ribbons through elaborate arrangements. Musicians tested equipment beneath an arch of white roses. My mother spotted me immediately and rushed over, clipboard in hand, stress radiating from every movement. "Finally, the place cards are a complete mess. Someone mixed up all the table assignments. Fix it." She shoved papers at me and disappeared before I could respond. I stood holding the crumpled list, feeling the familiar weight of being simultaneously needed and dismissed. The place cards were scattered across a table without organization. I spent 2 hours sorting them, cross-referencing names with table numbers, making sure every guest would know exactly where they belonged. The irony was not lost on me. Around 10, Claudia arrived with her bridesmaids, a flutter of emerald dresses and champagne laughter. She looked stunning in her custom gown, lace and silk flowing around her like something from a dream. Photographers swarmed immediately, capturing every angle. No one asked me to be in any photos. No one acknowledged my presence at all. I finished the place cards and moved to the gift table, arranging packages with care. Guests started arriving around 11. I watched them file in, dressed in their finest, greeting each other with warmth and excitement. Victoria found me near the back around 11:30, pulling me into a tight hug. "You holding up okay?" "I'm fine," I lied automatically. We found seats together, which suited me perfectly. I wanted to observe without being observed, to survive this day without incident. But 30 minutes before the ceremony, my mother appeared again. "There's been a seating change. We had several last-minute additions. We need to accommodate everyone properly." "Okay," I said slowly. "Where should we sit?" "Victoria is fine here, but we need you at table 17. I pulled out the seating chart I had memorized while organizing. Table 17 was in the far corner of the reception area, tucked away near the restrooms. The overflow table. The table for distant relatives and obligatory invitations. "That's next to the bathrooms," I said quietly. "It's where we need you. Please don't make this difficult." Victoria stared at me, horrified. "Annabelle, no. You're her sister." "It's fine," I heard myself say, though my voice sounded hollow and distant. "It's not fine. It's cruel. But what could I do? Cause a scene? Prove every negative assumption my family had made about me?" I squeezed Victoria's hand and walked toward table 17, each step heavier than the last. The table was exactly as humiliating as I had feared. Tucked behind flowering bushes that partially blocked the view, positioned so close to the restrooms I could hear plumbing. The other seats were empty, name cards showing distant cousins who probably would not arrive until the reception. I sat down alone, fighting tears that threatened to ruin my makeup. Around me, the venue filled with laughter and conversation. The string quartet began playing. Guests took their seats in orderly rows, everyone positioned according to their importance in Claudia's life, and I sat next to the restrooms, invisible even in a crowd of 300. The ceremony would begin in 15 minutes. I considered leaving, just standing up and walking away, never looking back. But paralysis kept me frozen, some combination of obligation and self-punishment, forcing me to witness my own insignificance. I thought about my grandmother, who had died 3 years ago. She had been the only person in my family who truly saw me. She would slip me chocolate when my parents were not looking, tell me stories, make me feel like I mattered. Her death had devastated me, but my parents had rushed through the funeral, eager to move past the grief and return to celebrating Claudia. 10 minutes before noon, someone sat down beside me. I looked up, startled. The chair next to mine was supposed to be empty, but now a man occupied the space, and he definitely was not family. He was striking. Dark hair, strong jawline, perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray, intelligent and focused entirely on me. "This seat taken?" he asked, though he had already sat down. "I think it's supposed to be empty," I said, confused. "Are you sure you're at the right table?" "Absolutely certain," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Julian." I shook his hand automatically, feeling warmth spread from his palm to mine. "Annabelle." "I know," he said, and something in his tone made my heart skip. "I've been looking for you." Before I could ask what he meant, he leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Please," he said, those gray eyes holding mine with an intensity that made everything else fade away. "Just follow me." "What?" I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "Follow you where?" But he was already standing, adjusting his jacket, waiting. His hand extended toward me, an invitation I did not understand. The string quartet played. Guests murmured. Somewhere nearby, my mother was ensuring every detail was perfect for Claudia's entrance. And this stranger, this impossibly handsome stranger who somehow knew my name, was asking me to follow him. I should have demanded explanations, should have stayed in my assigned seat where I belonged. Instead, I took his hand and stood. "Trust me," Julian said, his fingers closing around mine. "Everything is about to change." Julian led me away from table 17 with absolute confidence, weaving through seated guests toward the front of the ceremony space. My heart hammered against my ribs. Confusion flooded through me, mixing with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Wait," I whispered urgently, trying to pull my hand free. "We can't go up there. That's for family." "Exactly," Julian said, and the smile he gave me was both gentle and knowing. We stopped at the third row, right side, where my parents sat with Gregory's family. My mother's eyes widened when she saw me approaching. Her expression shifted rapidly from surprise to disapproval to something close to panic. "Annabelle, what are you doing?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but sharp. "You're supposed to be at your assigned table." "Change of plans," Julian said smoothly, his tone pleasant but absolutely firm. "Annabelle will be sitting here, with family, where she belongs." "I'm sorry, who are you?" my father asked, his engineering precision demanding immediate categorization. "A friend of Gregory's," Julian replied, which was not really an answer. "And someone who believes family should sit together, especially today." Before my parents could formulate a response, the music shifted. The processional was beginning. Guests rose to their feet, turning toward the aisle where Claudia would soon appear. My mother shot me a look that promised consequences later, but she could not argue now without causing exactly the kind of scene she had spent months trying to avoid. Julian guided me into the row, positioning us at the end, his body serving as a buffer between me and my parents. I stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. This stranger had somehow moved me from the worst seat in the venue to the family section, and I did not understand why. "Breathe," Julian murmured, his lips close to my ear. "You're going to be fine." The bridal party processed down the aisle in their emerald dresses. Then the music swelled, and everyone turned to watch Claudia make her entrance on my father's arm. She looked absolutely perfect. The dress caught the sunlight, creating an almost ethereal glow. Her smile was serene, confident, the smile of a woman who had never doubted her place in the world. I watched her glide past, feeling Julian's steady presence beside me, and wondered what it would be like to move through life with such certainty. The ceremony itself was beautiful and traditional. The officiant spoke about love and commitment. Gregory's vows were earnest. Claudia's were eloquent and perfectly delivered, not a single stumble. When they kissed, guests erupted in applause. My mother dabbed at her eyes. My father beamed with pride. And I stood next to a stranger who had upended my entire day for reasons I still could not fathom. As the newly married couple recessed back down the aisle, guests began moving toward the reception area. Julian turned to me, his expression suddenly serious. "We need to talk," he said. "Before the reception starts. Somewhere private." "I don't even know who you are," I said, finally finding my voice. "Why did you do that? My parents are going to be furious." "Let them be furious," Julian said, and there was something hard in his tone now. "Come with me. Please. I promise I'll explain everything." Against every instinct telling me to stay safe and small, I nodded. He guided me through the gardens to a secluded bench beneath a willow tree. The reception noise was muted here, a distant hum of celebration. He sat down and gestured for me to join him. "Start talking," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Julian took a breath. "My name is Julian Ashford. I own a venture capital firm here in Denver. Gregory and I went to business school together. We've been friends for about 5 years." "Okay," I said slowly. "That explains how you're here. It doesn't explain why you moved me." "I noticed you," Julian said simply. "Last month at the rehearsal dinner." "Do you remember?" I thought back. The rehearsal dinner had been at an upscale restaurant downtown. I had sat at the far end of the table, barely speaking, leaving early with a claimed headache. "I don't remember seeing you," I admitted. "I know. You left early. But before you did, I watched how your family treated you. Or more accurately, how they didn't treat you. It was like you were invisible to them. And I thought that was strange, because you were the only one at that table who seemed genuinely kind." My throat tightened. "You don't know anything about me. I know you spent 20 minutes helping an elderly server who dropped a tray while everyone else complained. I know you thanked every staff member by name. I know you looked miserable but stayed anyway because you thought it was the right thing to do." I stared at him, unsure how to respond. No one ever noticed things like that about me. "I asked Gregory about you," Julian continued. "He said you were Claudia's younger sister, still lived at home, wanted to be a teacher. He said it casually, like you were a footnote. And I realized that's how your whole family sees you. Someone who doesn't really matter." "Why do you care?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Because I grew up invisible too," Julian said quietly. "I was the youngest of 4 brothers. My father was a self-made millionaire who expected excellence. My brothers delivered. I was the sensitive one who read poetry and wanted to study philosophy instead of business. I spent 18 years being told I wasn't good enough, that I didn't fit. What changed? I decided they were wrong. I went to business school to prove I could compete in their world, then built something they had to respect. But I never forgot what it felt like to be dismissed by people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. When I saw you at that rehearsal dinner, I saw myself at 20, so I decided to do something about it. I struggled to process this. Moving my seat was kind, but it doesn't change anything. I'm not finished, Julian said, steel entering his voice. I did some research, just public information, and I found something interesting. He pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward me. It showed a legal document dense with text I did not immediately understand. What is this? Your grandmother's will. She died 3 years ago, correct? I nodded, remembering her warmth, her chocolate, her love. She left you a trust fund, $250,000 to be released when you turn 21. Did you know about this? The world tilted. No, that's impossible. My parents never said anything. That's because they're controlling the information. Your grandmother stipulated you should be told on your 20th birthday. But your parents decided to wait until after Claudia's wedding. They didn't want anything distracting from her big day. I felt sick. My 20th birthday. The birthday they had skipped to fly to Rome. How do you know this? I have a friend in estate law. He found the will in public records. Your parents aren't doing anything illegal, but ethically it's questionable. That money is yours. Your grandmother wanted you to have choices. Tears burned my eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know. Because your grandmother saw you. Even if your parents don't. And because I think you should have all the information before you decide what comes next. What comes next? Julian leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. I have a proposition. Something that will change everything. But first, I need you to trust me a little while longer. Can you do that? I should have said no, should have walked away. But my grandmother had left me money. She had thought of me, and this man had noticed me when no one else had. What kind of proposition? Julian smiled. During the reception, when it's time for toasts, I'm going to stand up and speak. I'm going to tell a story that will make everyone see you differently. But I need your permission first, because once I start, there's no going back. What kind of story? A true one. About a family that forgot to value someone precious. About a young woman who deserves better. About how sometimes strangers see us more clearly than blood relatives. My heart raced. My parents will be furious. Yes. Claudia will probably be angry too. This will disrupt her perfect day. But here's the thing, Annabelle. Your grandmother wanted you to have choices. I'm offering you one right now. You can stay silent, stay invisible, keep being overlooked. Or you can let me speak, and let everyone see what I saw. Someone kind and patient and worthy of so much more than a seat next to the restrooms. Tears spilled down my cheeks. All the hurt from my birthday, from every dismissal, from 20 years of being second best rose up like a scream I had suppressed for too long. Will it hurt them? Yes, Julian said honestly. It will embarrass them, make them confront how they've treated you. But sometimes people need to hurt before they can change. I thought about my grandmother, about her love that had felt unconditional, about the money she had left me so I could have options. I thought about sitting next to the restrooms, knowing nothing would ever change unless I changed it. Do it, I whispered. Tell your story. Julian's smile widened. He squeezed my hand. Thank you for trusting me. Now let's go back to the reception and get ready for everything to shift. The reception area had been transformed into something from a fantasy. White linens draped every surface. Crystal chandeliers hung from temporary structures. The dance floor gleamed beneath soft lighting. The 7-tier cake dominated one corner like an edible monument to excess and perfection. Guests mingled with champagne flutes, laughter echoing across the gardens. Claudia and Gregory held court near the head table, accepting congratulations with practiced grace. My parents flanked them like proud guards, my mother's smile wide and genuine in a way I rarely saw directed at me. Julian and I entered together, and I felt eyes turn toward us immediately. Whispers started. Who was that handsome man? Why was he with the younger sister? The attention made me want to disappear, but Julian's steady presence beside me kept me anchored to reality. "Remember," he murmured, "you belong here just as much as anyone else." We found seats at a table closer to the center. Not at the family table, but miles away from my original assignment. Victoria spotted me and rushed over, her expression confused and intensely concerned. "What happened?" she whispered urgently. "One minute you were in the corner, next you vanished. Your mom looks absolutely furious." "Long story," I said. "This is Julian. He's a friend of Gregory's." Julian shook Victoria's hand with easy charm. "Nice to meet you. Annabelle's told me wonderful things." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, protective instincts fully engaged. "Has she? Because she just met you like an hour ago." "Victoria," I said gently, "it's okay, really." The servers began bringing out the first course, an intricate salad arrangement that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. I pushed food around my plate, nerves completely killing any appetite. Julian ate calmly, occasionally making small talk with other guests at our table, playing the role of charming wedding attendee absolutely perfectly. Across the room, my mother kept shooting glances at me that promised serious consequences. My father looked perplexed, as if trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. Claudia appeared oblivious, too absorbed in her own celebration to notice any family tension. The meal progressed through multiple elaborate courses. Servers cleared plates and refilled glasses with practiced efficiency. The band played soft background music. Everything was perfect, exactly as Claudia had meticulously planned for months. Then the best man stood to give his toast. He was Gregory's college roommate, someone gregarious and funny who told stories clearly designed to embarrass while charming. Guests laughed in all the right places. Gregory grinned sheepishly. Claudia pretended to be scandalized but clearly loved every second of attention. When the best man finished to enthusiastic applause, the maid of honor stood. She was one of Claudia's friends from law school, polished and impressively articulate. Her toast was elegant, touching on how Claudia inspired everyone around her to be better, to reach higher, to never settle for anything less than extraordinary. I listened to her describe my sister and recognized the truth in every word. Claudia did inspire people. She was exceptional in every measurable way, but somewhere along the journey, her exceptionalism had become the impossible standard by which I was constantly measured and perpetually found wanting. The maid of honor sat down to more enthusiastic applause. Glasses clinked. Claudia wiped away a single delicate tear. The moment was absolutely perfect, exactly what she deserved. Then Julian stood up. The room quieted gradually, confused murmurs rippling through the crowd like disturbed water. This was not on the program. The toasts were supposed to be finished. Who was this man, and why was he interrupting? "Excuse me," Julian said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the entire space. "I know I'm not on the official toast schedule, but I hope you'll indulge me for just a few minutes." Gregory looked puzzled, but nodded slowly. Claudia's perfect smile faltered slightly. My mother's expression turned to absolute ice. "My name is Julian Ashford," he continued. "I'm a friend of Gregory's from business school, and I'm here today because I was moved by a story I think everyone should hear. A story about what it truly means to be family." My heart hammered so violently, I thought everyone must hear it. Victoria grabbed my hand under the table, her grip painfully tight. "A month ago, I attended the rehearsal dinner for this wedding," Julian said, his voice steady and clear. "It was lovely. Excellent food, beautiful venue. All the people Gregory and Claudia care about gathered together to celebrate their love. But I noticed something that evening. Something that troubled me deeply." He paused deliberately, letting the tension build like a wave gathering strength. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. There was a young woman at that dinner who helped a server when no one else did, who thanked every staff member by name, who stayed even though she was clearly unhappy, because she believed it was the right thing to do. That young woman is sitting here today, and her name is Annabelle. All eyes turned to me instantly. I felt completely naked, exposed, every instinct screaming at me to run. But Julian's voice kept me anchored in place. Annabelle is Claudia's younger sister. She's 20 years old, and on her 20th birthday, exactly 1 month ago today, her entire family flew to Rome without her. They left her alone to celebrate what should have been a milestone, because they were too busy planning this wedding to remember she mattered. Audible gasps echoed through the crowd. My mother stood abruptly, her face flushed deep red. "This is completely inappropriate. Sit down immediately." "I'm almost finished," Julian said calmly, not yielding an inch. Today, Annabelle was seated at table 17, next to the restrooms, the overflow table reserved for distant relatives and obligatory invitations. While her sister's friends had places of honor, Annabelle was hidden away like something embarrassing, like someone who didn't belong at her own sister's wedding. Claudia's expression crumbled visibly, shock and something that might have been genuine shame crossing her features. Gregory looked absolutely horrified. My father sat frozen, finally paying real attention. "But here's what I want everyone to know," Julian continued, his voice softening just slightly. "Annabelle's grandmother, who died 3 years ago, saw something her parents apparently cannot. She saw a kind, thoughtful, remarkable young woman who deserved to be cherished. She left Annabelle a trust fund of $250,000 to be accessed at 21. Money meant to give her choices and freedom and independence. Money her parents decided not to tell her about because they didn't want anything to distract from this wedding." The silence was now absolutely complete. Even the band had stopped playing mid-note. My mother stood trembling, fury and humiliation warring visibly on her face. "I'm not telling this story to ruin anyone's day," Julian said, his eyes finding mine across the crowded room. "I'm telling it because Annabelle deserves to be seen. She deserves to know that someone values her. That she's worthy of front row seats and birthday celebrations and all the love her family has lavished exclusively on her sister. And maybe, if we're very lucky, this will be the moment that finally changes how her family sees her." He raised his glass high, the crystal catching the light beautifully. "To Annabelle, may she always know her worth even when others forget it. And to Gregory and Claudia, may your marriage be filled with the kind of unconditional love every single family member deserves." He drank deeply, then sat down. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Victoria started clapping, slowly at first, then louder and more insistent. Other guests joined hesitantly, uncertain but clearly moved. The applause built gradually until it filled the entire space, and I sat completely frozen, tears streaming down my face, unable to process what had just happened. Claudia stood slowly, her perfect composure completely shattered. She looked at me across the room, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw my sister truly see me. Not as an afterthought or a duty or background scenery, but as someone she had genuinely hurt. "Annabelle," she said, her voice breaking visibly. "I didn't know. About the table, I mean. Mom arranged the seating, and I just assumed you were fine with wherever they put you. I'm so sorry." My mother finally found her voice, shrill with barely controlled indignation. "How dare you? This is Claudia's day. You have absolutely no right to make it about you." "I didn't make it about me," I said quietly, standing up on shaking legs, my voice held despite everything. "Julian told the truth you've all been avoiding for years. I'm your daughter too, Mom. I'm Claudia's sister. But you treat me like I'm invisible, like I don't matter at all unless I'm useful to you." My father stood now, his usual engineering precision crumbling into visible confusion. We've provided for you, given you a home, an education, everything you need. What more could you possibly want? I want you to remember my birthday, I said, and my voice finally broke. I want to sit with family at my sister's wedding instead of being hidden next to the restrooms. I want to be told when my grandmother leaves me money because she loved me enough to think about my future. I want what you give Claudia without her even having to ask. I want to matter. The reception dissolved into complete chaos. Some guests looked deeply embarrassed, averting their eyes. Others whispered frantically to their companions. A few dabbed at their eyes with napkins. My mother stood trembling, apparently unable to formulate any response. My father looked like someone had just explained a concept in a language he did not speak, and Claudia crossed the room, her elaborate wedding dress rustling with each step, and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. I'm sorry, she whispered directly against my hair. I'm so sorry. I've been completely selfish, self-absorbed. I didn't see how they treated you, because I was too busy enjoying being the favorite. But I see now, and I'm truly sorry. I clung to my sister, 20 years of accumulated hurt pouring out in sobs I could no longer contain or control. She held me firmly, and for the first time ever, it felt like she was really present, really seeing me as a person rather than an obligation. When we finally pulled apart, I saw my parents still standing frozen in their places, and I knew instinctively this was just the beginning. One toast had not magically erased decades of systematic neglect, but it had cracked something fundamental open, forced a confrontation where there had only been quiet, miserable acceptance. Julian appeared at my side, his hand finding mine with gentle certainty. You okay? I don't know, I admitted honestly. But thank you, for seeing me, for speaking up when I couldn't. Always, he said simply, and I believed him completely. The reception never fully recovered its earlier perfection. Guests tried valiantly to recapture the celebratory mood, but tension hung heavy in the air like humidity before a summer storm. Some people approached me with apologetic smiles, mumbling awkward phrases about how families were complicated. Others avoided eye contact entirely, embarrassed by the public exposure of such profound dysfunction. My mother retreated to a corner with my father. Speaking in furious whispers I could hear fragments of as I moved cautiously through the room. Words like humiliation and ungrateful and ruined floated across the space, but I also heard my father say something that sounded remarkably like, maybe she has a point, which was more genuine self-reflection than I had ever witnessed from him. Claudia and Gregory cut the elaborate cake with smiles that looked noticeably strained. The band played enthusiastically. People danced with forced cheerfulness, but the perfection had cracked visibly, and everyone could see the deep fissures underneath. Victoria cornered me near the bar, her expression absolutely fierce. That was the single most incredible thing I've ever witnessed in my entire life. Are you okay? Really, truly okay? I think so, I said, surprised to realize it was actually true. I feel terrified and exhilarated and sick all at once. That's completely reasonable, Victoria said firmly. You just upended your entire family dynamic in front of 300 witnesses. Julian upended it, I corrected automatically. I just agreed to let him. Same thing exactly. You chose to be seen. That takes real courage. I glanced around the reception, watching my sister navigate her thoroughly disrupted celebration with considerably more grace than I would have managed in her position. I didn't want to ruin her wedding. You didn't ruin anything, Julian said, joining our conversation with 2 fresh glasses of champagne. You told the truth. If that ruined something, the something was already fundamentally broken. As evening descended slowly, the reception gradually wound down. Guests departed with uncertain farewells, clearly unsure whether to offer congratulations or condolences. Claudia and Gregory left for their honeymoon suite eventually, but not before Claudia pulled me aside one final time. We need to talk, she said, her carefully applied makeup now thoroughly smudged from tears. Really talk, not just surface pleasantries. Not today, obviously, but soon. When Gregory and I get back from our honeymoon, I want to have dinner. Just us. I want to understand everything I've missed. Okay, I said quietly. I'd genuinely like that. She hugged me again, and this time it felt completely real. Not performative or obligatory or done for appearances, but genuine human connection. When she left, I found myself standing alone for a brief moment, taking in the remains of the elaborate reception. Flowers still bloomed abundantly on every surface. The cake sat partially consumed. Empty champagne flutes littered tables everywhere. Everything had been absolutely perfect until suddenly it was not. Julian appeared beside me, his jacket slung casually over one arm. Want to get out of here? God, yes, I said with feeling. We slipped away as servers began the cleanup process, escaping into the cool evening air. Julian's car was parked in the lot, a sleek black sedan that spoke of success without unnecessary ostentation. Where to? He asked as we climbed in. Anywhere except home, I said firmly. I don't think I can face my parents tonight. Hotel it is then. Somewhere genuinely nice where you can process everything without constant interruption. He drove us to a boutique hotel in downtown Denver, the kind of elegant place I had never been able to afford on my student budget. The lobby was all polished marble and soft lighting, elegant without being pretentious or intimidating. Julian handled the reservation while I stood numbly, still wearing my pale blue dress, feeling completely disconnected from reality. The room he secured was beautiful, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city lights. I sank onto the plush bed and finally let myself feel absolutely everything I had been desperately suppressing. Thank you, I said, when Julian emerged from the bathroom with a glass of cold water. For everything. I don't know how to possibly repay you for what you did tonight. You don't owe me anything at all, Julian said, settling into a comfortable armchair across from the bed. I did it because it was right, and because you deserved someone firmly in your corner. Why, though? I asked, the question I had been holding back finally emerging. You don't know me at all. We'd never even spoken before today. Why risk so much for a complete stranger? Julian was quiet for a long moment, his unusual gray eyes thoughtful and distant. I told you about my family, about being the invisible son. What I didn't tell you was that I spent my entire 20s angry, bitter. I built my company partially out of spite, wanting desperately to prove them all wrong. And I succeeded financially beyond anyone's expectations. But I was absolutely miserable because I was still living entirely in reaction to them. He leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. Then I met a therapist who asked me one question that changed absolutely everything. She asked, "What would you do differently if you could go back and save your younger self?" And I realized I couldn't save that version of me, but I could help someone else who was exactly where I had been. So when I saw you at that rehearsal dinner, looking exactly like I had felt at your age, I decided to do something meaningful about it. You changed my entire life today, I whispered. Yes, Julian agreed simply. It is different now. Your family will have to confront how they've treated you. You'll have access to your grandmother's money soon, which means you'll have real choices. You can move out, transfer schools if you want, start over somewhere your history doesn't define you completely. The question is, what do you actually want? I thought about that carefully. For 20 years, I had wanted my parents to notice me, to love me the way they loved Claudia. But maybe that had always been the wrong goal entirely. I want to feel like I matter, I said slowly. Not because of what I achieve or how useful I am, but just because I exist. I want relationships where I don't have to constantly earn affection. And I want to teach. I want to help kids who feel invisible the way I did, so they know someone truly sees them. Julian smiled warmly. Those are good wants. Worthy ones. And you know what? You can have all of them. Starting right now. We talked for hours. He told me more about his company, about the work he did funding startups and innovative ideas. I told him about my education classes, about the lesson plans I had already started creating even though I was still just a junior. We talked about books and music and Denver and dreams, and somewhere in the long conversation, I realized I had found something I had never expected. A friend, a real one, who saw me completely and chose to be in my corner anyway. Around midnight, Julian stood to leave. Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be intense when you face your parents. But remember, you have options now. Real ones. You don't have to accept whatever they offer. You can demand better. Will I see you again? I asked, suddenly afraid this was a one-time intervention. Absolutely, Julian said firmly. I'm invested now. Besides, I genuinely want to hear how the family confrontation goes. He left, and I lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every single moment of the day. My sister's wedding had been perfect until it was not. My family's dysfunction had been hidden until it was exposed, and I had been invisible until someone decided I deserved to be seen. I fell asleep thinking about my grandmother, imagining her smiling down at this entire chaos, pleased that her money would give me the choices she had always wanted me to have. The next morning, I returned home to find my parents sitting rigidly at the kitchen table, a tense tableau of forced confrontation. My mother's eyes were red and swollen from obvious crying. My father looked completely exhausted. We need to talk, my mother said as I entered, her voice brittle as thin ice. Yes, I agreed calmly. We absolutely do. What followed was not easy or comfortable. My mother tried desperately to defend her choices, insisting she had always loved me equally, but Claudia had needed more attention because of her remarkable ambitions. My father admitted he had not noticed how isolated I felt, that he had wrongly assumed silence meant contentment, rather than resignation. I told them everything with brutal honesty. How my forgotten birthday had felt like complete abandonment. How being seated next to the restrooms had confirmed every fear I had about my place in their hearts. How learning about the trust fund from Julian instead of them had hurt more than anything else, because it proved they saw me as someone to be managed rather than included as family. They listened, though whether they truly heard me remained uncertain. My mother apologized, though it felt hollow and defensive. My father looked genuinely shaken, his logical mind visibly struggling to process the emotional data. I want to move out, I told them firmly. When I turn 21 and can access Grandma's money, I'm getting my own apartment. I'll finish school and start my life on my own terms. You don't have to wait, my father said quietly, surprising me. We'll help you find a place. Pay the deposit. Whatever you actually need. I studied him carefully, searching for manipulation, but finding only what looked like genuine regret. Maybe he was capable of real change. Maybe they both were. But I was not waiting around to find out. Thank you, I said simply. I'll take you up on that offer. Over the following weeks, my family dynamic shifted in ways both profound and subtle. Claudia returned from her honeymoon absolutely determined to build a real relationship with me. We started having lunch every Tuesday, conversations that felt genuine instead of obligatory. She admitted she had been so intensely focused on her own success that she had never considered what her shadow meant for me. My parents tried harder, though decades of ingrained patterns proved difficult to break overnight. They remembered my birthday for the first time when I turned 21, with a small dinner where I was actually the focus. It was not perfect, but it was something. And Julian became a constant, steady presence in my life. Not romantic, though I would not have objected, but something deeper and more meaningful. A mentor, a friend, someone who had decided I was worth investing in, and never wavered from that belief. He helped me find a beautiful apartment near campus, introduced me to people in Denver's education circles, offered advice when I struggled, and celebrated every small victory. And slowly, gradually, I began to believe what he had told me that first day. I belonged. I mattered. I was worthy of being seen. 6 months after the wedding, Julian invited me to coffee at our usual downtown spot. He seemed excited about something, barely containing his energy. "I've been thinking," he said once we settled into our favorite corner table. "Remember when I told you about wanting to help someone the way I wished someone had helped me?" "Of course I remember. I'm starting a foundation. Nothing massive initially, but focused specifically on supporting young people who feel invisible in their families. Therapy access, educational support, mentorship programs. And I want you involved." I blinked, completely surprised. "Involved how exactly?" "Consulting. Helping me understand what kids actually need. Maybe running some programs eventually if you're interested. You could do this alongside teaching. Make extra income while doing something genuinely meaningful." "Julian, I can't ask you to create opportunities for me." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Because you understand this work in a way most people fundamentally don't. You've lived it. And now you're teaching kids who are living it too. That perspective is absolutely invaluable." I thought about all the invisible children who would pass through my classroom over the years, about how much more I could do with real resources behind me. "Yes," I said. "I'm definitely in." My final year of college flew by in a blur of student teaching and coursework and foundation planning. Julian and I met weekly to develop programs. Victoria provided input from her psychology studies. Even Claudia contributed, offering legal expertise about structuring nonprofit organizations. My family had become a team, imperfect but functional, each contributing what they could. Graduation came in May. My parents attended, sitting in the audience with genuine pride visible on their faces. Claudia came too, now obviously pregnant with her first child, cheering loudly when I crossed the stage. Julian waited for me afterward with flowers and a smile. "You did it." "We did it," I corrected. "I wouldn't be here without what you did at that wedding." "You would have found your way eventually," Julian said. "I just accelerated the timeline." That summer, I began teaching. My own classroom with 28 fourth graders who looked at me with a mixture of hope and anxiety. I recognized the invisible ones immediately. Sophie, who hung back from others. Marcus, who stuttered. Jennifer, whose worn clothes made her shrink. David, whose reading struggles had labeled him slow. I made sure they all had moments to shine. Sophie's insights during literature discussions were highlighted. Marcus's written work was celebrated. Jennifer's artistic talent was showcased. David's mathematical thinking was praised publicly. Slowly but surely, my classroom became a place where being overlooked was simply not an option. The foundation launched officially in August with 20 students and 10 volunteer mentors. We matched kids who needed support with adults who committed to showing up consistently. We provided training for mentors, resources for families, and follow-up support throughout the year. Sophie became one of our first participants. Through careful observation, I had noticed warning signs that extended beyond normal shyness. She often wore the same clothes multiple days. She hoarded cafeteria food. She flinched at sudden movements. Through the foundation, we connected Sophie with a therapist and a dedicated mentor. We provided a clothing voucher disguised as a classroom prize. We made sure she had consistent meals without making it obvious. And slowly, gradually, she began to emerge from her protective shell. By December, Sophie was volunteering to read aloud in class. She had made 2 genuine friends who actually saw her. She smiled more often, laughed more easily. She was still struggling, still facing challenges I could not fully fix. But she was no longer invisible. "You saved her," Julian said when I shared Sophie's progress during a foundation meeting. "I just noticed her," I corrected gently. "The way you noticed me." "Same thing," Julian said, echoing my words from that transformative wedding day. And he was right. Being seen when you feel invisible is not just kindness. It is revolution. By the time I turned 23, the foundation had expanded far beyond our initial modest goals. We now served 15 schools across Denver, reaching over 300 invisible children who finally had adults committed to seeing them. My principal, Dr. Morrison, called me into her office one afternoon in late April. I went nervously, still conditioned to expect criticism, despite consistently positive feedback. "Sit down, Annabelle," she said, her expression carefully neutral. I sat, hands folded in my lap, waiting. "I've been observing your classroom closely this year," she continued, "watching how you interact with students, paying particular attention to which kids thrive under your instruction." My stomach clenched. "If there's something I need to improve..." "There's not," Dr. Morrison interrupted firmly. "You're one of the best teachers I've seen in my 30 years as an educator. But that's not why I called you in." She leaned forward, her expression becoming serious. "I want to offer you an expanded position next year. Not just teaching, though you'll still have your classroom. I want you to develop a comprehensive mentorship program here at the school. Something similar to what you're doing with your foundation, but integrated directly into our structure. Paid position, additional responsibilities, but potentially enormous impact." I stared at her, struggling to process. "You want me to build a program?" "I want you to identify invisible students and make absolutely sure they're seen," Dr. Morrison said clearly. "You have a gift for this, Annabelle. Let's use it to help more kids." Tears pricked my eyes. 2 years ago, I had been sitting next to restrooms at my sister's wedding, invisible even to my own family. Now I was being recognized professionally for my ability to see others. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes." That summer, I poured myself completely into designing the school mentorship program. Julian provided strategic advice, and the foundation offered supplementary funding. Victoria helped me create assessment tools to identify struggling students. Claudia, now a mother herself, offered legal expertise in structuring the program to avoid liability issues. When school resumed in August, the program launched with 20 students and 10 carefully trained volunteer mentors. We matched kids who needed support with adults who committed to showing up consistently. We provided extensive training for mentors, resources for families, and ongoing follow-up support. Sophie, now a 5th grader in another teacher's classroom, became a peer mentor for younger students. She helped identify kids who were struggling, using her own painful experience to recognize the signs others consistently missed. "I was invisible," she told a group of new mentors during training. "Miss Annabelle saw me, and it changed absolutely everything. Now I want to see other kids too." The program thrived beyond all projections. Students who had been failing started succeeding academically. Discipline problems decreased dramatically as kids felt noticed and valued. Teachers reported significantly better classroom dynamics, and families began engaging more fully, feeling supported rather than judged. By winter break, Dr. Morrison pulled me aside again. "The district superintendent wants to meet you personally. They're considering implementing your program across all elementary schools." My program, something I had built directly from my own pain, now expanding to help hundreds of invisible children. "That's incredible," I whispered. "You're incredible," Dr. Morrison corrected firmly. "Own it, Annabelle." The meeting with the superintendent exceeded my wildest hopes. She was passionate about student well-being, frustrated by traditional approaches that consistently missed struggling kids. She wanted innovation, and my program offered exactly that. "We'll start with a pilot in 3 schools next year," she explained. "If it succeeds, we'll roll it out district-wide. You'll train other coordinators, develop curriculum, oversee implementation. Are you ready for that level of responsibility?" I thought about the girl I had been at 20, sitting alone on her birthday. I thought about Julian's intervention and my grandmother's trust fund, and every moment that had led to this one. I'm ready, I said. Meanwhile, consequences had been quietly accumulating for my parents. Claudia had gradually distanced herself from them, processing her own complicity in my neglect and choosing to build something better with her own children. Extended family members who had witnessed Julian's wedding toast began questioning other family dynamics, uncomfortable with their own passive enabling. My father's colleagues at his engineering firm had learned about my foundation work through a local news article. Several approached him privately to express how impressed they were with his daughter, forcing him to confront how long he had dismissed my aspirations as unimportant. My mother lost her leadership position in her book club when members learned the full story of how she had treated me. The group collectively decided that someone who could overlook her own child should not guide their community discussions. The social consequences were not dramatic or publicly humiliating, but they were persistent. A gradual exclusion that mirrored how they had once excluded me. They felt the weight of being invisible to people who used to value them, and in that uncomfortable experience, they finally began to understand. 3 years after Claudia's wedding, I found myself standing at a podium in front of the Denver Board of Education. The Invisible Student Mentorship Program had expanded to 15 schools, serving over 300 children. Success metrics exceeded every single projection. And now I was presenting a comprehensive proposal for district-wide implementation. My parents sat in the audience, looking older, but somehow softer. Claudia held her toddler on her lap, her pregnant belly obvious beneath her dress. Victoria had taken time off from medical school rotations to attend. And Julian sat in the front row, his expression radiating pride and encouragement. I was 24 years old. I had my own apartment, my own career, my own life built from intentional choices rather than default expectations. And I was about to advocate for invisible children in front of people who could make systemic change. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady despite nerves. "My name is Annabelle, and I was invisible for 20 years. I told my story without shame. Not the humiliating details, but the essential truth. A family that systematically overlooked me. A grandmother who saw me even after death. A stranger who decided I was worth fighting for. And a journey from invisibility to purpose. Every school has invisible students," I continued. "Kids who are present but not truly seen, who struggle quietly, fail silently, hurt without anyone noticing. Traditional systems miss them because they're designed to catch dramatic problems. But invisibility is insidious. It erodes self-worth gradually, creates wounds that last lifetimes. I presented data, detailed case studies, success metrics. I showed how my program identified at-risk students before they became statistics. I demonstrated cost-effectiveness and scalability. I made the case not from emotion alone, though emotion was present, but from evidence and strategy and proven results. When I finished, the board asked thoughtful questions about implementation and sustainability and potential challenges. I answered each carefully, drawing on 3 years of experience and the support of a dedicated team that had helped refine every aspect of the program. The vote was unanimous. District-wide implementation, beginning in the next school year. Afterwards, my parents approached hesitantly. My mother's eyes were wet with tears. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice breaking. "What you've built, what you're doing, it's truly remarkable." "Thank you," I said, accepting the praise but not needing it the way I once desperately had. My father hugged me, awkward but genuine. "I'm sorry it took so long for us to see you properly, but I'm grateful we finally did." "Me too," I said honestly. Claudia wrapped me in a careful hug, mindful of her pregnant belly. "You're changing lives, little sister. I hope my kids turn out half as compassionate as you." "They will," I assured her, "because you're already committed to seeing them." Julian waited until my family had moved away before approaching. "You were brilliant up there." "I was terrified," I admitted. "Terror and brilliance aren't mutually exclusive," Julian said warmly. "You've built something incredible, Annabelle. something that will outlast both of us. Your grandmother would be so proud." "I think she knew," I said softly, "that money she left me. It wasn't just about financial security. It was about giving me the freedom to become someone who could do this work. She saw who I could be, even when I couldn't." "Just like I saw you at that wedding," Julian said. "You changed my life that day," I told him, not for the first time, but with renewed understanding. Not just by exposing my family's dysfunction, but by showing me I was worth fighting for. That single act of witnessing gave me permission to believe I mattered. "You always mattered," Julian said. "I just helped you realize it." The foundation continued growing exponentially. We expanded services, hired more staff, reached more children across multiple districts. I trained coordinators, teaching them to recognize invisibility and respond with intentional attention. The work was exhausting and fulfilling in equal measure. Sophie, now in 8th grade, volunteered with the foundation during summers. She had decided to become a teacher herself, inspired by being seen at her most vulnerable. She would go to college on scholarships the foundation helped her secure, continuing the cycle of transformation. Marcus performed in his high school's theater program, confidence built on early encouragement. Jennifer's artwork hung in our foundation office, a constant reminder of what happened when talent was nurtured instead of dismissed. David excelled in advanced mathematics, proof that labels could be overcome with proper support. Each student represented a life altered because someone chose to notice. On my 25th birthday, exactly 5 years after my family had flown to Rome without me, I hosted a dinner at my apartment. Victoria brought wine. Claudia and Gregory came with both kids. My parents arrived with flowers and apologies that still felt necessary, but were gradually becoming less frequent. And Julian brought dessert from my favorite bakery, the same one we had first visited when I was lost and uncertain. We gathered around my small dining table, plates piled with food, conversation flowing easily. This was family too, built not from blood obligation alone, but from choice and effort, and commitment to being better. "I want to propose a toast," Julian said, raising his glass. 5 years ago, Annabelle was invisible to almost everyone in this room. Today, she's changing education policy across Denver and inspiring countless children to believe they matter. That transformation is remarkable, but here's what I want everyone to remember. Annabelle was always this person. The potential was always there. She just needed someone to see it. And to fight for it, I added quietly. "Sometimes being seen isn't enough," I continued, looking around the table at faces that had become my chosen family. "Sometimes someone has to be willing to make people uncomfortable, to disrupt polite fictions, to insist that neglect has consequences." My mother flinched slightly, but nodded. The wounds were still healing, even after years. That was okay. Some hurts required time. "To Annabelle," Julian said, "and to every invisible person who deserves to be seen." We drank, and I felt the weight of everything that had changed. I was no longer the girl sitting alone on her birthday. I was no longer the sister relegated to a corner seat. I was no longer invisible. But I was also still her, carrying those experiences as fuel rather than wounds. Every invisible student I helped for her. Every program I built for that lonely 20-year-old who thought she didn't matter. The foundation work continued expanding. By the time I turned 26, we had established programs in 23 schools across 3 districts. The model was being studied by education departments in other states. I traveled to conferences, sharing our methodology, teaching others how to identify and support invisible children. My parents had learned, through persistent social consequences, that their selective attention had not only hurt me, but had rippled through their own lives in ways they were still discovering. Several of my father's colleagues had quietly stopped inviting him to social gatherings after learning how his family had treated me. My mother found herself excluded from community groups she had once led, facing the same invisibility she had once imposed on me. They felt the weight of being overlooked by people who used to value them. And in that experience, they finally understood what they had done to me for 20 years. Claudia had become one of my closest allies. Her second child was born healthy, and she approached motherhood with deliberate intention, determined not to replicate our parents' mistakes. She consulted me regularly about how to ensure both children felt equally valued, how to celebrate individual strengths without creating hierarchies. "I'm terrified of becoming mom," she admitted one afternoon while we watched her kids play, "of playing favorites without meaning to." "You won't," I assured her, "because you're already aware of it. That awareness makes all the difference." Victoria graduated medical school and started her residency at Denver General. Julian's foundation had grown beyond his initial vision, now serving hundreds of families across Colorado. And I continued building programs, teaching students, and creating spaces where invisible children could finally be seen. The revenge I had taken was not dramatic or cruel, but it was thorough and complete. I had transformed pain into purpose, used neglect as motivation to ensure other children never felt as I had. And in doing so, I had built a life far richer than anything my parents had imagined for me. Their dismissal had been their loss, not mine. One evening in late fall, I received a call from a producer at a national morning show. They had heard about my work and wanted to feature the Invisible Student Program. I would have 5 minutes on live television to explain our methodology and impact. I called Julian immediately. "They want me on national television." "Of course they do," he said calmly. "You're doing revolutionary work. Are you nervous?" "Terrified." "Good. That means it matters. You'll be brilliant." The morning of the interview, I woke early and dressed carefully. Professional but approachable. Competent but warm. I thought about Sophie and Marcus and Jennifer and David and hundreds of other children whose lives had changed because someone chose to see them. I thought about my grandmother, who had given me choices through her trust fund. I thought about Julian, who had stood at my sister's wedding and forced everyone to see me. And I thought about that lonely 20-year-old girl sitting next to the restrooms, believing she didn't matter. The interview went perfectly. I spoke about invisible children with passion and expertise. I explained our methodology clearly. I shared success stories without violating privacy. And when the host asked what inspired this work, I told the truth. I was invisible for 20 years in my own family. Someone saw me anyway, and that changed everything. The segment went viral. Within days, I received hundreds of emails from parents, teachers, and children who understood exactly what I was talking about. Schools from across the country requested information about implementing similar programs. Donations poured into the foundation. My parents watched the interview from their home. My father called afterwards, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw you, Annabelle. Really saw you. And I'm so sorry it took this long." In the weeks that followed, my parents learned that their decades of neglect had finally caught up with them in ways they could no longer ignore. Their closest friends had quietly distanced themselves after the interview went viral, uncomfortable with being associated with parents who had treated their daughter so poorly. My father's younger brother, my Uncle Thomas, called to express his disappointment in how they had raised me, straining a relationship that had lasted 50 years. My mother's sister sent a letter detailing how she had always suspected something was wrong, but had stayed silent, and now regretted her complicity. Their church community, after learning the full story, stopped inviting them to leadership positions and social gatherings. Even their financial advisor mentioned the interview during a meeting, noting how proud they must be of me now. The unspoken emphasis on now, highlighting their past failures. They felt increasingly isolated, experiencing firsthand the loneliness and exclusion they had once imposed on me, and the weight of that recognition changed them in ways words never could. I continued building programs, teaching students, and creating spaces where invisible children could be seen. The revenge I had taken was not dramatic or cruel, but it was thorough. I had transformed pain into purpose, used neglect as motivation to ensure other children never felt as I had. And in doing so, I had built a life far richer than anything my parents had imagined for me, proving that their dismissal had been their loss, not mine. Looking forward, I knew my journey from invisible daughter to visible advocate was not over but ongoing, each day offering new opportunities to choose to see the overlooked and to remember that being noticed when you feel invisible is not just kindness, but revolution. And as I stood in my classroom each morning, greeting students by name, making sure every single child knew they mattered, I carried with me the memory of that girl sitting next to the restrooms, and I made sure she knew her story had purpose, her pain had meaning, and her invisibility had finally, permanently ended.